counties and hundreds of cities. The reason for the legislation is in some cases pragmatic. Supporters argue that a patchwork of local ordinances in things like construction codes and zoning ordinances creates confusion for the public and headaches for business. But for many of these bills, the reasons are ideological, as more progressive policies, often relating to climate change or restricting an industry, are rejected in Tallahassee and adopted by local officials, often in Democratic dominated city and county commissions. Here today to help us navigate this subject, we are welcoming back a good friend of Hot Topics for his wealth of knowledge on Florida politics. Today's moderator, Aubrey Jewett, received his PhD from Florida State University and is currently Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Jewett is an internationally acknowledged expert on American and particularly Florida politics, and his quotes have appeared literally thousands of times. He has authored more than 20 books, chapters, and journal articles. His professional colleagues have recognized him with over a dozen awards for teaching, advising, service, and research. Professor Jewett is a former president and current treasurer of the Florida Political Science Association. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Jewett, but before doing so, I'm not sure why we're having a little technical difficulty. I'm not able to put up the flag, but normally we would have the Pledge of Allegiance at this time. We're not going to pledge allegiance to no flag. So we're just going to assume that everyone here would participate if we had a flag. And then secondly, I'd like to welcome any elected officials who might be present and remind you that this session is being recorded. It will be available after it's finished on YouTube on the League of Women Voters Orange County YouTube channel. It is also being live streamed on Facebook. So if anyone's having trouble logging into Zoom, you can always see it on the League's page on Facebook. That's the League of Women Voters Orange County. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A. They will be monitored, and we will take your questions at the end. The official rule is you must be a member of the League in order to ask a question. So I ask you to please observe that. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Jewett, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. It's great to be here with the League on this. Sorry, got some feedback there. It's great to be here with the League today and to talk about this important topic about preemption. And in just a second, I'm going to introduce our three guests today who are going to be on the panel. I just wanted to say one word overall about preemptions at the state level. This is an issue that's been going on for some time now. I went back and looked. I wrote a chapter on county government for the Florida Association of Counties about 6 years ago. It was the last time I updated it. And here is what I wrote, just a brief sentence about preemptions at that time. I said, the state has preempted local governments in dozens of policy areas. For instance, the state legislature has passed a complete preemption on the regulation of firearms and ammunition, new local ordinances about increasing minimum wage, requirements for restaurant nutritional information, or additional restrictions on smoking, ownership of exotic animals, use of plastic bags by retail establishments, or disposal of biomedical waste. So those are just some examples of the kinds of things that we're talking about, where the state has come in and told local governments they cannot pass local ordinances, regulating these issues. So it's an important issue, and it continues today. Well, to talk about preemption and some of those specifics that I just mentioned and some of the new ones that have come up in this most recent legislative session, we are joined by three distinguished panelists. We have the Honorable Antonio Tony Ortiz, who is the first and only Puerto Rican elected official to hold a position as commissioner of the city of Orlando and serves District 2. He is also currently serving as president of the Florida League of Cities. Being raised in the home of public servants inspired Commissioner Ortiz to develop a genuine sense of commitment for his community. His experience is broad. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 9 years, graduated from the University of Central Florida. Go Knights, wearing a monogrammed shirt today. In addition to that, he's worked in the accounting and banking industries, and he served our community for 14 years in the Orlando Police Department. Commissioner Ortiz was selected in 2008, works proactively in his community, and pioneered the implementation of the concept of neighborhood and business councils. He believes every person should have fundamental knowledge of government, and he launched a government academy in 2014, which continues to this day, and I think is a terrific idea as a political science professor. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
In addition to Tony Ortiz, we also have Ida Eskamani. Ida Eskamani is a first-generation Iranian American and the daughter of parents who worked tirelessly to build a better life for their children. She earned a master's degree in public administration from the University of Central Florida. Go Knights. I will also say, just as a quick interjection, that I have known Ida for many years. She and her sister were the primary officers of the Pi Sigma Alpha Honor Society, of which I have been the faculty advisor for many years. And so that's how I got to know Ida originally, when she was an undergraduate and an officer in the Honor Society. In addition to her degrees from UCF, she currently leads state legislative and collaborative governance efforts for several racial and economic justice organizations in Florida. She advocates for building a government that works better and guarantees equality and justice for all. Ida also leads statewide coalition efforts to defend local democracy against industry-driven preemption here in Florida. And last, but certainly not least, we are also joined by Martha Haynie. Martha Haney was elected to the office of Orange County Comptroller in 1988 and was re-elected 6 times, serving a total of 28 years. During her time in office, the county's budget grew from about $1 billion to almost $4 billion. And as Comptroller, Haney was the Chief Financial Officer, Treasurer, County Recorder, and Clerk to the Board of County Commissioners and County Auditor. She had her hands full with many different jobs in that position. Among the things that she's most proud of, Haney cites the successful local collection and protection of the tourist development tax, not losing any public money when the investment world went haywire, and after years of fighting, getting the largest settlement from an online travel company of any local government. She either has served or currently serves on a number of boards, including the Rollins Hamilton Holt Board of Advisors, the Guardian Care Nursing Home, and Planned Parenthood. Her recognition include being named the 1998 Outstanding CPA in Government by the Florida Association of Certified Public Accountants, the University of West Florida Distinguished Alumni Award in 2008, and the 2012 Equality Florida Voice for Equality Award. Now retired, Marty is active in her First Unitarian Church of Orlando and also on the Tiger Bay Board of Directors and is a member of the League of Women Voters. So welcome all three of you and thank you for joining us in that discussion. So let's jump right into this. The League and some of its members have prepared some questions and I believe you all had some input in some of these questions as well. So let's go through some of them. Let's start with the 2021 Florida legislative session, which just wrapped up. Could you share one or two of your key takeaways from this session? And I guess I will just go in order that people were listed in the panel. So we'll start with Commissioner Ortiz, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the privilege of being in here. Thank you for the invitation. Directly to your question, I believe my take was, and let me make a statement before I even start with this. We have a great delegation that represent us in the Central Florida region. I have to start with that to make that preamble and make sure that we keep them aside from everything else I'm going to say. What I take is there's a huge lack of knowledge in Tallahassee. As I said, let me keep my delegation aside, but there's a huge lack of knowledge. And in many instances, we elect people because they speak pretty and look pretty. And we don't really know if they have what it takes to represent us. Many of them have not worked at the local level. And if they haven't, the fact that when they go to a state legislature, if they were to keep tabs on what's going on back, like our delegation does, it would be much easier for us to work with them. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people go over there, they don't have the local experience in many cases, and they speculate what's best for us without consulting with the constituency. So the real contact with the communities is not there. Therefore, we have that distance when they're creating, when they're legislating. And as Thomas Jefferson would say, you know, the government closest to the people serves the people's best. And I think that communication between municipalities, counties, and state is paramount for us to move the needle forward in our community. So basically, in small words, lack of knowledge.
Let me unmute myself there. Thank you so much. And let's see, we'll go on now to Ida Eskamani.
Thank you, Dr. Jewett. I echo the commissioner's words. It's such an honor to be here, especially with you, Commissioner, and the Honorable Martha Haney, and Dr. Jewett, who of course has been a longtime professor. And I certainly would not be here today if it wasn't for you, Dr. Jewett, and all your work. So just very grateful. And thank you to the Legal and Voters for having us. I appreciate that, Commissioner Ortiz. I'll add a little bit to it. Some of the themes from this session, particularly when I reflect back on the previous sessions and really over a decade plus of preemption being abused in the legislature, you know, we saw a lot of really broad language this session, really broad, unwarranted preemptions that have a lot of intended and unintended consequences that really only litigation will determine. We also saw national trends. We saw bills pop up in Florida, preemption bills pop up in Florida that we've never seen before here in the state, but that we've also seen multiple copycats across the country, particularly around climate change and addressing the climate emergency. We saw legislation that's been seen across the nation pop up here in Florida as well that undermines a lot of the amazing local work happening around addressing the climate crisis. And also, quite frankly, I saw an arrogance among folks where they really didn't want to learn about how these issues would actually impact their own governments and their own communities. And even when we communicated it, just sort of saying that's not true. And it's literally people directly impacted saying, this bill will do this. And then sort of that fact just being denied and the bill moving anyway through the legislative process. And really just a lot of folks, a lot of our lawmakers not wanting to work with us, you know, and really, as we see often with preemption, addressing something that maybe a scalpel would be better with a sledgehammer, right? And a lot of really serious consequences. And the last thing I'll note is just the hyper-partisanship. We've seen industry-driven preemption for years, where it's very much profit-driven, and it's really about trying to undermine a local law that protects people to make more money, right? We see that a lot. and that in itself is a bipartisan problem, by the way. But the other layer here is sort of this hyper-partisanship and local governments turning into this boogeyman, and sort of putting blame on local governments for issues that really is the responsibility of the state legislature. And quite frankly, local governments are sort of doing the good work to address some of these issues, and now their hands are tied. So lots of themes there. I'll say it was definitely a very rough session for local democracy, but a lot of incredible work, and very grateful for the League for standing on the side of home rule. And again, this is a fundamental Florida value, and it's about small government closest to the people. And so we'll certainly continue that fight. But those are some of the quick things that when I think about the 2021 session that come to mind when it comes to home rule.
Okay, thank you. And then same question to our third panelist, Martha Haney.
Thank you. Let me also thank the League for inviting me to be on this panel. As I said earlier in our off-screen discussion, I have had the luxury since I retired, of really not having to pay too much attention to what's going on in Tallahassee and the Florida legislature, because many years ago I ran out of patience with those people. I could not agree more with what Commissioner Ortiz and what Ida have said about their, with few exceptions, our local delegation being one of them, that they don't seem very interested in getting the real information about how their actions are going to impact local government. And I think the main thing to remember from my time in local government is that one size does not fit all. There's such incredible diversity among the cities and counties in Florida. And we have large urban counties who've got tremendous resources and ability to deal with things that smaller counties cannot or don't want to deal with. And to have the legislature putting on this one size fits all rule on all things just simply doesn't work. My deepest experience with the benefit of being able to have local administration on an issue is with the collection and enforcement of the tourist development tax. And I don't want to, I will go into more detail about that later, but I will say briefly that our ability to enforce and audit that tax has had tremendous benefits to Orange County and Orange County citizens, and enabled us to do things like the arena and the Performing Arts Center, as well as our convention center. And I have no doubt whatsoever that had the legislature been a little bit faster in preempting that, we would have been hamstrung in any number of ways.
Okay, thank you. And so let's move on. Does the Florida Constitution address the relationship between state and local governments? And I'll throw in, I'm going to put in two questions together and throw in charter counties, because that is discussed in the Florida Constitution. So we'll talk about what is the relationship between state and local governments, and also with charter counties. And again, I guess we'll just continue to go in the same order. So we'll start with Commissioner Ortiz. If for no other reason, then it'll be easy for me to remember.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question. Yes, it does. The Florida Constitution does. Section 1 and Section 2 of Article 8 of the state constitution does address the relationship between state, counties, and municipalities, giving, and of course, counties are an arm of the state, direct. Municipalities are corporations with exceptional powers. That's the main difference there. But we both have been, back in 1968, were given what is called home rule powers, which is the power to be able to enact laws, ordinance that pertain to our communities, as long as they don't interfere with the state. And that's the beauty of it. Now, when you ask about the counties, if counties have more rights than other counties, yes, they do. The ones that are that have charters, they do have more rights. The ones that don't have to follow the letter of the law according to the state. And that's a major difference in terms of rights for the communities. As we were addressing these issues before with the first question, there's something I want to reinstate, is the fact that this nation, the founding fathers formed this nation based on what is called republicanism. And I'm not talking about the Republican Party, and I'm not talking about Democratic Party. Thomas Jefferson would state that more, refined kind of way. Republicanism is about the governed being able to elect those who govern and give them directions. So it established that relationship, which is pretty much what we do with home rule. It's about the people, the residents of the state, telling those who are representing, which is all of us in public office, at the municipal, county, state, or federal level, we represent, we don't dictate. And that's where I think we have lost contact with our people. If we were to go back, and that's why we, at the Florida League of Cities, we have this initiative this past year to teach people about these fundamental philosophies, and not only that, how we continue to drive them when it comes to legislations, and to remind those legislators at the state level that they're supposed to represent us, not to tell us what to do without the consent of the people. So going back to the relationship between state and municipalities and counties, the real powers, I think the real government, is, you know, the old saying, all politics are local. It has a great value because, true, the reason behind this is because everything is supposed to emerge from the people's will, from their needs. And the needs of the people don't have a party label. They don't have religion. They don't have a social status. They need commitment. And we have lost a lot of that.
If I could
Okay,
add.
sorry, it took me a second to unmute, but yes, please go ahead, Ida. Thank
No
you.
problem, Dr. Jewett. Commissioner Ortiz's description of the Constitution is of course completely on point. And I wanted to add just a couple quick pieces. You know, from our perspective, I work in issue advocacy, nonpartisan, and we focus on various racial and equity issues at all levels of government. And in the coalition work we do around home rule, it's really the only issue that unites all these different advocates. We have animal rights organizations, climate advocates, racial and economic justice groups, worker rights groups, the list goes, rural advocates, advocates for rural lands, right? It's really an issue that unites folks of all political backgrounds, all around a fundamental belief that we should decide, we the people. And a lot of times as advocates at the local level, we're fighting our local governments too. But the fact is we should have that right. We have that right enshrined in our Constitution. And I want to echo a little bit just also some of the differences between the state legislature and local government in the sense of transparency and access, right? So our local governments are much closer to the people. They also meet much more regularly than the state legislature. The budget process is mandated to have certain sort of transparent public forums, things of that nature. Everything the legislature has decided behind closed doors in Tallahassee, and particularly this last session where they literally locked the Capitol out from the public. The public was not allowed to go into the building without a meeting, and a staffer had to come to the door to let you in, the Florida House of Representatives. The Florida Senate was not open to the public at all. And yet they steamrolled these bills that erase our voice at the local level, along with bills that address, of course, our right to vote, our right to protest, and our right to direct democracy. So we saw this sort of assault on our voice. And really, when we look at the differences between local governments and the state legislature, local governments are also nonpartisan, right? And really have to put people first. And again, is more accessible to people to build those local communities that meet our needs. And it was just, when we look at Florida, you know, we have rural communities, we have urban cores, we have beach towns. What works in one community may not work in another. And that's why home rule is such an important Florida value that this legislature just really undermined in so many ways. But I just want to lift up constitutionally, Commissioner Ortiz has got it on point. And I wanted just to paint some of those distinctions between local governments and the state legislature and why it's such a travesty to undercut those fundamental rights that we have as Floridians.
Okay, thank you. And now to Martha, thank you.
Yeah, and if I can expand a little on what Ida said, you know, we're the Sunshine State, and government in the sunshine is a really big deal at the local level, and it is followed to the letter of the law, and we have to be careful every day, all the time, to make sure that we are being as open and transparent as the law dictates us to be, and as is appropriate for us to be. But interestingly enough, the Florida legislature is not subject to the same sunshine laws. So they adopt sort of a father knows best attitude about do as I say, not as I do. And I find that really frustrating from the local level. I spent a lot of time myself trying to explain my job to Florida legislators who frankly weren't very interested in what my job was or what the impact and what they were doing might have been. And in Orange County, because of our size, we were able to be successful in a lot of ways, sort of despite the legislature, but it was an ongoing battle. And one of the things that came to mind when I was thinking about that is the fact that we had local control over our investments, so that when the state's small business fund that is a boon to small counties and that it acts as a bank, but when things started to go south with investments, they froze it. They closed the bank. And there were a lot of small counties and cities that very briefly couldn't make their payroll because they couldn't get to their money. And those of us who had some broader investment opportunities could still pay people. That's a big deal.
Indeed. Okay, onward. Who is behind the ongoing legislature preemption movement? Does it tend to be corporate donors, specific organizations, PACs? Is it just individual legislators who have a particular personal issue? You know what, from y'all's perspective, why is this happening? Who's behind this? And let me mute myself and turn it over to Commissioner Ortiz.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doctor. I think all of the above. All of the above. You have the special interest, you have the self-serving interest, and you have ignorance. Plain and simple. A lack of contact with the communities, as I stated earlier. People not doing their due diligence when it comes to before the legislature meets. They need to come back, or at least, you know, if they are to render to really honor what they're supposed to be doing as legislators. They're supposed to be getting back either with the communities or with the local elected officials to see what's going on in the communities. So there's a combination of different aspects. I can give you as an example, back in the days when I was in law enforcement, we had a big issue with shopping carts all over the place. And so the city decided we were going to have an ordinance to establish the parameters for what the retailers had to do in order to stop this nonsense, because they were clogging the system, the streets, the drainage. So the retailers went to, because we were finding, we were in some instances, code enforcement was coming over and giving fines to the retailers, and some other instances, law enforcement was stopping people taking these cards, going back, checking if they were authorized to do it, and if they were not, they were charged for theft. So it was a combination thereof, but the retailers didn't come and talk to municipalities. They went directly to Tallahassee, to the Association of Retailers, and next thing you know, the municipalities have been preempted from dealing with this. And people don't know what goes on in Orlando compared to what goes on in any other municipality around the state, 411. So we could have all enact different ordinances that would help our community without having one size fits all kind of ordinance that preempts us. So for the longest time, because there was only X amount of retailers that were part of the association that they could control, they promised that they were going to talk to those and control those. How about the ones that weren't? So I think there's multiple elements to this equation, and that's why it's so important for the communities to know what's going on, for the residents to get involved, to know what's going on in terms of legislations, in order to call their representative. It only takes 5 minutes to call both of the representative, you know, the representative and the senator, and say, listen, this is how I need you to vote on this particular, because there's a way it affects me. And for the most part, most people around the state have the same needs. So it would be a lot easier. It's kind of sad it doesn't happen that way.
Okay, thank you. And I.
Thank you, Dr. Jewett. I'm going to name some names on the corporate interest side, but so a lot of this is public information. Actually, there is one good thing the Florida House of Representatives currently does, which is when you lobby, you have to register around what bill you're lobbying for. You don't have to indicate if you're for or against it, but if you understand the bill and the special interest, you can kind of determine who's on what side of it, right? And 9 times out of 10 of these preemption bills, you'll find someone like me against the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the Associated Industries of Florida, the Associated Building and Contractors, the Retail Federation. And these are the trade associations that represent a lot of brands that we know and love and shop at. That includes, you know, Walt Disney World, Target. We also saw, of course, on the cruise line industry is really engaged. The monopoly utility companies have been very engaged. So I'll give a couple quick examples, just some of the bills that we dealt with this last session, right? The preemption over restriction of utility services, TECO Energy was one of the biggest corporate interests behind pushing that bill. On the Seaport preemption bill, which basically erases 3 local referendums that were overwhelmingly passed by Key West voters, literally taking their vote and just throwing it out the window because a corporate interest didn't like it. They donated $1 million to Governor DeSantis' reelection campaign, and they lost the battle at the local level to stop these referendums around environmental regulation for cruise line industries. And so they came to legislature, passed a bill to completely erase them. We see also a lot of conservative think tanks behind some of these. So the preemption of occupational licensing, for example, is sort of a national trend that groups like Americans for Prosperity, which are funded by the Koch brothers, right? We see that behind this. So the tobacco industry came in on a bill that raises the vaping age to 21. The tobacco industry put an amendment on to preempt every type of local ordinance on tobacco regulation, which is already preempted. This is around their marketing campaigns. So no, those are going to be preempted. And so there's a lot of corporate interest behind these bills, and you can find that in the lobbyist registration. A lot of them do hide behind the Chamber of Commerce and the Associated Industries of Florida, but with a little digging, you can figure it out. And then on the other layer, though, which the commissioner also shared, is just the partisanship that's kind of coming into this now. You know, the first bill the governor signed into law post-session was the preemption of public state of emergencies, that add all these new regulations to local governments to issue state of emergencies, which will impact how we can act in hurricanes and things of that nature. And the message around that was this really, you know, it's impacting your freedoms because masks are somehow impacting our freedoms. You know, it's scary. And they're creating these boogeymen to sort of distract folks from the real challenges before us, right? And so we see that too, which is honestly, it's very frustrating because corporate interests, that's been decades. Like we see that, we know that, we can try to work on that. But when we're facing sort of an ideological barriers, it's been harder to overcome because logic and sense don't really apply. And lives are on the line. We've seen preemption disproportionately impact blue collar workers, women workers, you know, people that are historically ignored and marginalized. And that is regardless of where you live and what your party is, right? And so there's real harm in these bills too. But I digress, but I wanted just to name some names in the sense of some of the brands that we know and love and pay, like, you know, give our good money to, that are actively undermining our rights in the Florida legislature.
Okay, thank you, Ida. And turning it over to Martha.
Well, first of all, let me thank Commissioner Ortiz for calling me out when I said that I didn't pay any attention to the Florida legislature anymore, because absolutely we all should be paying attention to what's going on at the Florida legislature. And I can probably find the time to make some phone calls, and I appreciate that reminder. And really my hat is off to both of you who are working so hard in what is such an uphill battle with I think the arrogance of the Florida legislature. But back to us citizens, it is actually our responsibility to pay attention to who we're electing, because they don't get there on their own. We put them there, and we need to be paying attention to what they're doing. Specifically to the question, in my experience, it really depended on what the issue was. When I was dealing with trying to get some regulation fairness in the taxation of the online travel companies, sometimes the hotels were fighting me and sometimes they were supporting me. So it may depend on which way the wind is blowing. Dr. Jewett, I'm just not really sure.
Well, and we do get a lot of wind here in Central Florida, so that may be explaining some of it. All right, well, it's 12:40, and theoretically we were going to go to audience questions, but I would like to ask one more question from the list first before we turn it over to the audience. And we actually have 2 or 3 more that we could talk about, but the one that I would like to talk about is the last one that was on the list, which is what is the long-term fix to prevent or at least slow down the yearly or every session attack on the rights of local government? Meaning, what, if anything, can we do to try to keep home rule alive at the local government? And so we'll go in the same order as usual.
Dr. Jewett, thank you for that question, because that particular question has been the basis of our campaign around the state of Florida, is empowering people with the knowledge. We need to empower people. We have to get people motivated. This got to become a virus, you know, just like this really have to touch everybody in the state. I don't care if you are a resident, not a resident, if you are a citizen, not a citizen. You need to know what it takes for us to get the power and the influence of government back to the people's shoulders. And I think the way we do this is, and we have the academy, but we have taken this to a whole new level. We started an advocacy department at the Florida League of Cities to make sure we get to all the groups, all the different like chambers of commerce, Kiwanis clubs, anybody, universities, anybody who's willing to listen. We need to get people acquainted and empowered with the knowledge about government and how important it is for them to make that quick phone call, to know what the priorities for the municipalities or counties may be, and for them to make those quick phone calls and say, listen, their legislators, if they're not in touch. As I said, we're blessed with ours, Ms. Eskamani, and we have Carlos Smith, and they call back, Victor Torres, they call back, they check with us, they know what we need, and for the most part, you can see in the way they vote, they're really representing the people locally. But that's not the case around the state. And so the only way to cure this is for people to really start calling, the masses start calling, and for those legislators to see that the people are paying attention. There's only 160 legislators of them, 120 in the House and 40 in the Senate. There's 2,270 municipal elected officials, about 3,000 plus county and 3,000 plus school board members. What's wrong with this picture? How come we're not winning this battle? So that's why we started this campaign around the state, informing, teaching people about government. Is exciting. It's really exciting if you really think about it, but we need to get people involved.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sounds good sound advice. And turning it over to Ida.
Thank you, Dr. Jewett. I echo that. What we have found is that when Floridians understand what's happening with preemption, they're angry and they oppose it. Overwhelmingly, Floridians support home rule. They support local control because it's our power. I mean, who would say, no, I don't want to have power? But what the legislature and really corporate interests have done so effectively is sort of use the wonkiness of preemption to their advantage. They've exploited this tool to get what they want at the state level, to undermine our power at the local level. And now it's also manifested to this very hyper partisan effort, which has even made it more nefarious, right? So what we do know is that when folks are educated on this topic, they oppose the abuse of preemption. And I do want to note that, preemption is a neutral tool. It can be used for good. Clean air and clean water standards, I mean, that's a statewide preemption. That's a good thing, right? The issue here is that what the legislature continues to do at the bequest often of corporate interests is that they create a ceiling rather than a baseline, right? They say you cannot go above this. And they generally take away a current standard at the local level, reduce it, and then say, you can't go above this, right? So preemption in itself is a neutral tool, but it's so wonky as a concept that the legislature has been really successful in exploiting it against our voices and our health and our public safety. So we have to continue to educate folks. Forums like this are so important, but to the commissioner's point as well, folks need to talk to their state senators and state representatives with the outrage around why did you support all of these bills, right? And of course, what the League of Cities is doing is amazing in getting their local municipal leaders to call and ask the same questions. And I think it's particularly important in more sort of rural and conservative districts, because some of the sort of theories behind this is that they're often preempting, quote, progressive cities. But when you look at the actual bills they're pushing, this is beyond ideology. This impacts all of us, regardless of where we are. And the whole point of home rule is that your local community reflects your local needs and values, right? A couple quick things I'll add is we have submitted over 20 organizations have signed on to a veto letter to the governor, urging him to veto several of these bad bills. Unfortunately, some of them he already signed into law before session even ended, including House Bill 1. Of course, the public emergency preemption bill he signed as soon as session was over, but there's still a long list of bills that we're waiting for him to act on, particularly around the climate. We're urging him to veto those bills. There's also an action alert. Folks can participate, conservation voters. I'll pop in the chat as well. But we are urging the governor to veto these bills. In the past, he has vetoed bad preemption bills, but also most recently, he's really been a champion of preemption. So it could go either way here, but we're holding out hope and urging him to veto these and staying with the people of Florida to protect local democracy. But really, the education is so important. The more folks know about this, the more they oppose it. So we have to keep teaching folks about what's happening in their state legislature and get them involved.
Okay, thank you. And then turning it over to Martha.
I want to suggest that what the League of Cities is doing and the things that Ida are talking about, the education is what really is the key. It's to get people involved. And I'm going to say again, that includes getting people involved about paying attention to who they are electing, who you send up there, because that matters. The air must be different in Tallahassee because there's an arrogance there that I never was able to really get through. But it gets back down to us, and we can do something about it, and we have to pay attention.
Heidi. All right, thank you. And then I've been looking on the chat board, and several of our audience have posted questions, and I'll encourage other audience members, if you have questions, to go ahead and please post. One that was asked a little bit earlier, and Ida actually answered it briefly in the chat, but I want to bring it up to all, was this one. Can the state attorney or attorney general be forced into enforcing constitutionally required actions or policy? Can Governor DeSantis and the Republican legislature be halted through this way?
If I may say something, the state attorney, the attorney general has a lot of power. I don't know if most people know that we have a weak form of government, of governor, executive power, because it's shared with 3 other members. And most people don't know this. People think that is, the governor's executive power, and then he appoints the different positions to a cabinet. We have a cabinet that shares powers with the governor, so it's not exclusive of the governor to decide what's going on around here. So I think we need to, as we send letters to the governor to veto or not veto, we should copy the other members of the cabinet, the attorney general, the CFO, and the commissioner of agriculture. So they'll have, they have a conversation among themselves. And I think the other thing is the governor needs to see the power of the municipalities by all of us coming together when we have whatever issues we have. And like Ms. Eskamani just mentioned here, sending letters to him so he knows that, because he can be blind. He knows that a lot of these legislators over there, they have no contact with the communities. So if he really wants to stay as a governor, I think he needs to realize that he needs to stay in touch with those who are closer to the people, which are the commissioners, the mayors at the different levels, the counties and the cities, and with the school board members, representatives, in order to get a better sense of what's going on around the state. So I'll ask for the people to, when they disagree with whatever policy has been, whatever legislation has been passed, to write letters to the governor and say, listen, this is not something, this is something that's not good for us. Case in point, I should say, home-based businesses that just passed. I mean, it's going to be in his hands for him to decide. Can you imagine those communities that don't have homeowners associations or not gated? All of a sudden, next door guy wants to have a gym open 24/7. And there's nothing you can do, or they want to have a car shop, and there's nothing you can do because the municipality has been preempted. So we need to start paying attention to this is going on and write letters to whoever we think is, in this particular case, most of these legislations have already passed, some of those. So now we have to address our concerns to the governor directly.
And if I could add briefly to that, particularly on House Bill 1, which the governor signed into law during session, which has a long list of new enhanced penalties and really broad language around protests, but and also does preempt local governments in their budget process, and essentially allows any city commissioner and state attorney to challenge a local budget that reduces a police budget, right? Which of course at the local level we know that's a very complicated process, and those decisions are made with law enforcement. And we've seen, for example, in The city of St. Pete, instead of buying new police vehicles, they installed a mental health task force, but that was working with their law enforcement. Nobody is doing any of these public safety decisions without working alongside local law enforcement. But that bill, for example, we've seen some state attorneys and local sheriffs come out and say, we're not going to enforce this to the fullest extent because we think some of this language is very broad and dangerous. And the governor's come out and said, if you don't enforce this, I will defund you. And so these are some of the challenges we face, because state attorneys in particular are actually very powerful. They have a lot of discretion around what crimes they enforce, because we also know we have some pretty draconian laws in the books when it comes to nonviolent crimes, for example. And so, what we see is the governor sort of threatening their funding, which the legislature does determine for state attorneys if they don't implement this law. So those are the challenges we face as well. But to the commissioner's point, absolutely have your voices heard. I see Larry in the chat asking, does it work to contact your governor? What I will say is that they are counting on us to surrender and give up. We cannot do that. And I do believe that the hardest battles come before our victories. And so we are also seeing, in some ways, a backlash to the work we're doing at the local level. And I do think that the darkest is before the dawn, and we just have to keep up that pressure when it comes to defending home rule. They need to hear from us. They're counting on us to throw our hands up and say, oh, we can't, there's nothing we can do. That's what they hope we do that. So we can't do that.
Okay, thank you. And Martha?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to this is that when we're trying to educate people and get them to pay attention, it is not difficult to come up with example after example after example that people can relate to. It does not need to be presented as such a wonky, complicated, down in the weeds kind of issue. You can talk about simple things that people go, oh yeah, I don't like that, and get their attention and get them to do something about it. One letter to the governor is not going to make a whole lot of difference, but 10,000 letters to the governor, or even 1,000, might get his attention.
If I could add one more brief thing, because I know we've talked about a lot of doom and gloom, but I do want to talk about a couple good things that happened this session, and a huge kudos to the League of Cities for this work on stopping the vacation rentals preemption bill once again. That's a huge win. It's a big Airbnb priority to essentially
the sales tax.
Yeah,
the sales tax.
Yes, and some wins there, right? There were over 60, if you count the House and the Senate companions, over 60 preemption bills that were filed this session. And though quite a few really bad ones did pass, quite a few also we were able to stop. And so huge kudos to all the advocates, and against all odds, because again, we were also locked out of the Capitol. We had to testify off-site at the Senate, getting zoomed into the Senate hearings. So a lot of ridiculous things we had to go through, but we were able to organize and stop some of these bad bills, and we need to keep up that work.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's see. I think we have time for one more audience question. I have 12:54 on my computer, so let's go. Let me see here. I'll just sort of take them in order here. Since our Orange County delegation was doing pretty good work on this issue, how might we influence other counties in our area, Seminole, Lake, Brevard, for instance? How do we influence those county residents and or those cities, those county leaders to step up? And then they ask, do we know if any of the cities and those adjoining counties are going to the public? And we'll start again with Commissioner Ortiz.
Through the Florida League of Cities and through our campaign, we have mobilized the whole state. The 2,270 local legislators we had at the municipal level. We have mobilized everybody, and everybody's talking to their communities. Now, this is a process. You don't do this in a year. You have to keep on doing and keep on doing every year, and we're getting better. This was a tough year with the pandemic, but we took advantage of the fact that nobody has an excuse to say, no, I cannot meet with you, because through video conferencing, you can be in Russia and we can talk to you. So for that matter, now the other thing we're making people aware of is the fact that after the session is over, we have what is called a legislative summary. And in that legislative summary, we have the record of how everybody voted on the different legislations. And that's how you get to know what your legislator is doing, since if he's not communicating with you. And that is a tool for us also to bring to light who's really working for the communities and who's not. So we're hoping for this particular legislation and our efforts of advocacy that we're going to start touching those households and starting making some changes with the legislature. As I said before, I hope and I dream, I guess, at this particular point that it comes to a point where our constituency, our residents in the state are so well informed, and Thomas Jefferson again says, when you have a well-informed community, you can trust them with their government, right? That those legislators are going to start panicking and are going to say, I better start paying attention and start doing what my people are asking for. So, but we already have that system going in terms of getting to the people, municipalities. We're just hoping that every local municipal legislator is doing their job, in touching their communities.
And if I could add briefly to that, also share the love and gratitude to your local elected officials who are doing this good work, and also your state lawmakers who are really standing up for home rule. This is a hard task. They're up against some of the most powerful corporate interests in the state. They're up against very vindictive lawmakers who literally threaten them when they oppose them. So making sure that you are talking to your local leaders in your region and thanking them and urging them to keep standing up and fighting and knowing that you have their backs, right? Because it's really hard going up against some of these lawmakers too.
And we do, and I'm sorry to interject out of my term, but for example, the legislators we have like Eskamani, like Carlos Smith, like Victor Torres, these guys are against all odds up in Tallahassee, and they're home rule heroes. We recognize them as home rule heroes, and we tell our communities, these are the people you have to come to because they're really representing our communities, and we have to keep them up there, working and fighting for us. So, and we have to recognize those around the state that are doing the same thing. I'm not saying these are the only ones. We have more around the state. It's just that they're a minority.
They are. We have some, and I want to say there's some bipartisan folks too, and we got to lift up that as well. And really, preemption, defending home rule should be a nonpartisan issue. It impacts all of us. And I know everyone here believes that and agrees with that. And so the more we can lift up those heroes, the better, to really demonstrate that we've got some champions and that folks have a reason to be proud of and to fight for.
And I'd like to say too, as much as we're calling out and appropriately recognizing our delegation, to have people like Commissioner Ortiz and Ida also in there fighting so hard and working for us. We are lucky in Central Florida to have champions like this, and we need to support them as well. People like you left a legacy.
Wouldn't be here without you.
Note, I want to thank our panelists and our moderator. This has been most enlightening. I think we all knew a little, but today we know so much more and how this is really affecting us. I, for one, was so undereducated on this. So I'm really happy that we were able to bring this to everyone today. The preemption laws have been terrible, but it's a bitter pill, and we had a few in this session, but we're fighting on, as Ida said, and we are now better informed and able to do the work ahead. And I know that our members are to educate and empower our voters. I wanted you also to know that we are very lucky to have these panelists with such depth of experience today. And we do try every month to find a balanced panel. For today's program, we did reach out to Senator Broder, Representative Flaken, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, and they had conflicts. And we also reached out to Apopka Mayor Brian Nelson, who unfortunately was unable to return our calls. So I just want you guys to know that we are working hard as we can to be nonpartisan, but sometimes we need a little help. So next month, we will be discussing the school to prison pipeline. This is the intersection between the lack of mental health services and criminalizing our children. I hope that you can join us for a panel of community stakeholders to learn more about the intersection between juvenile justice and the lack of mental health services for our students. We'll have representatives from the state attorney, public defender's office, and the Orange County Public Schools, and a mental health provider who will share their experiences working with children in our community and how criminalizing our youth is resulting in long-term trauma. And being respectful of your time, I will just mention a few other upcoming events. As we all know, May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So we continue the celebrations with our AAPI community this month. May 15th, we have a board and committee chair orientation from 9 to 11:30. On the 17th, we have our board meeting. And on the 18th, we have our new member orientation where our previous president, Gloria Picard, will be speaking, and she is always inspirational. So if you're a new member, please take advantage. And finally, in June, the 4th and 5th is the Florida League's 38th Biennial State Convention. If you are interested in attending, watch for tomorrow's newsletter with full details on applying. We have a total of 20 spots available, so you need to apply quickly. The cost to register is $50, and we will be offering a limited amount of scholarships. So if you're interested, don't let cost necessarily stand in your way. Again, I want to thank this incredible panel. This has been fantastic, and we so appreciate your time. Thank you all for tuning in. And we will be back next month, the second Wednesday of the month. You can count on us. So thank you all. And I bid you good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you guys. God bless you.